All right, welcome. This is the Think Like an Herbalist Medicinal Broths workshop. So thanks to all who are joining live and for all of you watching the recording as well. I do have a couple things for you all. So I'm going to share them in the chat now. I made a handout for you all. If you want to have something to follow along with, you can make a copy of it and then you can just really easily fill it out as we go. And then I'm also going to share the slides with you. And that way, if you want to look back at them, I'll send these out in the recording as well, or in the email with the recording, but just in case. And I am having a hard time getting this link here. Come on, little computer, you can do it. All right, here comes the handout. And then maybe I'll share the slides in a little bit just because the computer's having a hard time. Okay. There it goes. Oh, that's not it. So sorry, that's a different link for later. Here is the link. So again, if you want to print that out or if you want to make a copy, you can take notes on the computer. So broth. We are going to talk a little bit about broth. I'm going to share my screen with you so we can just do a quick little review of why when we're talking about broth, why would we want to make it and to consume it and to incorporate, like, why is it worth incorporating and taking the time to, oops, to do it. So one of the main reasons that we incorporate broth into our foods is because it's considered like a healing food, a medicinally, we can add herbs to it, so it can be a medicinally prepared food. And the screen. Okay, we're just gonna do this. So, a big reason why we drink broth, again, is just because it is healing to our gut lining. And so it's considered to be like a healing food in that way. Um, and if we look at this, we can see that the main reasons that we use the main purpose, sorry, of our digestive system is to digest, absorb, and eliminate whatever we're not going to use. So, all of the different parts of our digestive system are going to be doing different things, starting in the mouth with your tongue and saliva, breaking down what we eat in various ways so that we can absorb it. And that serves every single body system. And then again, we can release. We have deposits that get put into the digestive system from other organs, like from the liver and the pancreas, and like hormones and bilirubin from the immune system, which are dead blood cells, and all this. Everything gets put into the digestive system if we want to eliminate it, because then it can come out in our stool, including like pharmaceuticals, excess mucus, whatever. So the main part of absorption is in the small intestine, and the small intestine is broken up into three parts. It has, are we on the next slide? It has three parts called the duodenum, course. The duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. And you can see that they're highlighted here. The duodenum is the smallest part. It's right after the stomach. And then the jejunum, and then the ileum, which is where most of the absorption of our digestive system occurs. And so, as a reminder, the small intestine is covered in these little lumps, and they're called villi and microvilli. So, like slightly larger and then like smaller little ridges. That is where the food, after going through all these different parts of our body and getting exposed to mechanical and chemical digestion, we have the food particles get small enough that it can move through the thin surface layer here and move into our bloodstream at an appropriate size to then be absorbed into the bloodstream and get delivered to wherever else it needs to go in the body. So what happens if that isn't working right is that we get a lot of inflammation in the body. And so this is what a normal kind of like villi and microvilli are going to look like, where all the cells are really close together. They're absorbing properly, and only the right size things are getting in. However, if there's inflammation, you have some more separation. Right? Inflammation brings like redness, and there's this excess of like, here you can see our pathogens and allergens that are getting in. So that's where we start to see a lot of issues in the gut. Another reason why, and I meant to put this in here, but I just must have forgotten it. There's this idea, right, that we have this our digestive system is set up to be it can be an analogy to it like a donut or a bagel. And so the idea is that you have the inside of your body, like your arm has a bone inside of it, but then you have your digestive system, which would be kind of like this inner tube, right? Like the donut, the hole inside the donut that is going to have a different quality of being inside the body. It's not actually in the body. It's just like if you eat a hamburger, right? Your hamburger is not in the body the way that the arm bone is in the body. And so we want to think about this in this context because part of the reason we have so many different issues within our digestive tract is that we are constantly being exposed to different things. Sometimes they're delicious, yummy, nutritious things. Other times they're accidental, like pathogens, getting germs, bacteria from food or probacteria, right? Probiotics can be good. But basically, we're just constantly 3 to 5 times a day, whenever we put anything into our mouth, we are exposing ourselves to just like the outside world. And so it's easy to forget that the inner lining of our digestive tract is exposed to almost as many things as the skin, as the outside of the body. And so in herbalism, we think of the digestive tract as skin in a certain way, right? It's tissues. Of course, everything is made of tissue, but it has similar needs. And so when we think of bone broth, it can be really healing. Also, I guess I want to mention, as far as broths, certainly broths can be made vegan and vegetarian. I'm going to focus on bone broth tonight because it's just adding one more ingredient, which are the bones. But everything we talk about, except for the bones, can be done vegetarian. And so all broths, vegetarian or bone broth, are high in trace minerals and vitamins because a longer cook time allows for the trace minerals to come out of the food that we're cooking and then into the water. And in some ways, you can really think about that just as a tea, as like a vegetable tea, a bone tea. When we make tea and we cook things, essentially we're doing an extraction. And so in herbalism, if you're not familiar with the phrase decoction, it just means making a tea where you boil it. And so certain herbs, like anything that's hard, woody, a berry, a bark, a root, is going to be cooked and simmered, just like we make rice, whereas something that's like a flower or a leaf will be left just to steep. And so you can think about bone broth as a decoction. For vegetarian and vegan broths, it's great to use mushrooms. Mushrooms do have higher proteins than vegetables, not as comparable to meat or whatnot, but any medicinal mushroom. I really love all mushrooms. The main mushroom I wouldn't really consider in this situation is like the the button mushroom. Is there another word for it? The brown one and the white one are the same. And they're actually the same species as the portobello as well. But they're just grown differently. So the portobello is allowed to get bigger. But either way, those common mushrooms, the button mushroom and the brown mushroom that you see everywhere in pizzas, they don't really have a lot of nutritional value or medicinal value. So you can use them, but they're just not the most useful. All the other mushrooms, shiitake, oyster, enoki, lion's mane. Sometimes I'll throw in like dried porcini if I have it. Those are all considered to be medicinal. And so we'll talk a little bit more about mushrooms in a little bit. But definitely if you're making vegan broth, I would make sure to add a lot of mushrooms. So for bone broths, going back to the healing factor and why people are really into it and talk about it all the time, is that they are rich in amino acids, and amino acids are the building blocks for protein. And as you might remember, protein, carbohydrates, and fats are the three main food groups of that we eat, that we need to have our body be healthy and in balance. And protein has a way of, because it's a more complex structure, and because it's made out of amino acids, it helps us feel full and give us a feeling of satiation, and also allows our energy to last the longest after eating. So it's always important, as we touched on in the Think Like an Herbalist webinar last month, when we are thinking about eating breakfast, we want to make sure that we're incorporating some proteins. So in particular, the amino acid that is most useful in bone broth is called glutamine. And some people will call it L-glutamine, or that's the most common one that you hear about. There's also D-glutamine, and they're very similar. But basically what glutamine does is that, because it's a building block to proteins, it will help rebuild the intestinal lining. And so that's really helpful, again, when you think about all of the things that we're exposing our intestines to, and the harm that can happen, right? Like being exposed to disease, or sometimes like bacteria, ulcers, just basically there's a ton of different ways that our intestinal lining can kind of get disrupted. And so the bone broth, which is high in glutamine, and there's other foods high in glutamine, but it's just a really great way to get that into our diet, especially because it's highly absorbable. It's been cooked for a long time. So when things are cooked, they get broken down, and then that just makes it less work for the body to do. Bone broths are also high in collagen and gelatin, and glutamine can also help with the health of the immune system. And so the idea that chicken soup is good for the soul could also be said that it's good for the gut. I'm sure if you've had broths before, like it can be nice. It is, a really nice food to eat when we're sick. And it just, it's easy to digest, it's soothing, it's anti-inflammatory and healing. So all of that plus the added benefits of all of the different vegetables that we're going to get broken down in our broth, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, have tons of trace minerals too. So you can think about, like potassium, phosphorus, selenium, zinc, vitamins A, C, and E. These are all available in the vegetables that we eat on our everyday life. And so they come through when we cook them in our broth. So without further ado, I'm going to just turn off my video for a second and get you all set up over in my kitchen. I have my bone broth set up here. And so here we are. Oh, it's not the best lighting. See if we can easily show that. Okay. Just move you all here. So, I personally like to use a slow cooker, and there's a couple of reasons for that. If you don't have a slow cooker, absolutely don't have that prevent you from making a bone broth. It's just kind of like an added ease. So you can get started, and then I got my slow cooker on Craigslist for like $30, but I've also seen them like on the side of the road and, in free boxes. So this is my slow cooker here. I'm gonna plug it in because it's easy to forget to do that. You can think, oh, I'll do that at the end, but then once it's all set up, it's almost like you you forget, you just walk away. So here's my crock pot. I'm also going to just go ahead and turn it on to high because that's what we're going to be cooking with. And the first thing I'm going to put in here is my bones. So I pulled this out of the freezer just before I got on this call. I have been collecting my bones. And so whenever I do that, whenever I eat meat, I just put my bones into a bag. And so this whole thing is just going to go into my crock pot. And I'll give you all an inside view in just a second. Sometimes when you get meat, it's like if you buy a whole chicken, they'll give you like the liver and the heart and the neck. That's also in here. So this is the inside view here. And now I'm just going to fill this up with water. If you don't have a ton of bones, that's okay. You're more than welcome to just use whatever bones you have. Like if you only had like 6 chicken bones, you can still make bone broth. It's not going to have as high of a medicinal quality or nutritional quality, but it's a good start. I do need quite a bit of water here. Let's see if I have any in this pitcher. All right, so the first step The first step of this is really just getting the bones going. So I'm going to add 1 more quart. Now I'm going to get the lid on. With a slow cooker, it's really important to have the lid on. In a few hours, I'm going to add my my vegetable scraps. So this is another bag I pulled out of my freezer right before the class. And this has all sorts of veggie scraps in it. So you see I have onion scraps, I have celery, I have some chard in here, the little bits I didn't want to eat, the inside of my pumpkin, kabocha squash. So all sorts of, garlic scraps, parsley, whatever. This is gonna go in. I have a lot of bones in here. I might actually take some of these bones out just for my next broth. I'm not sure. It feels like a lot. Yeah, that's fine. So I like to put these in a little bit later because I like to cook the bones for about 72 hours. I also usually add a little bit of this is apple cider vinegar because it's a little bit of acidity, just like a tablespoon or two. A little bit of acidity will help break down the bones and that's really what you're looking for. So a couple more things. Let me grab my herbs. So after a couple hours, and I say a couple, I mean like 6 to overnight. Then I'm gonna add, well, no. At any point, you can add your herbs. And the other part of making a bone broth is that you can add things throughout it. A bone broth traditionally is going to be cooked for between 24 and 72 hours. And I don't really have a hard and fast rule. I think once you have the bones in there, that's the most important part. And then afterwards, like I said, you could cook it for 24 hours and then just be done. Sometimes after I cook for 24 hours, the last 6 hours or so, I like to add my vegetables, so the bag that I showed you. And at any point, the beginning or with the vegetables, you can also add your herbs. So this is reishi. The 2 herbs I usually add to my broth are reishi mushroom. We talked about the mushrooms before. Here's the mushrooms again. And then also astragalus. So astragalus and reishi, this is astragalus, are both immune modulating herbs. And so if you have an autoimmune disease or if you're cooking for somebody with one, I do not recommend that you use them. It would be best to work with an herbalist and learn more about your personal condition before using either of these herbs. Same for elderberry. Elderberry can also be a really nice herb for the broth. So all 3 of these herbs are woody, and what that means is that they need to be boiled for them to be have fully express their medicinal qualities. And the reason that we use them is because we want to support our immune systems by preparing our foods in this way. And so when we have our medicinal herbs into our foods, then it's really easy to just take them without thinking, oh, I have to go like take my herbs now or have it be separate from our food, right? The father of modern medicine said, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. The idea being that your food is your first medicine. And so by incorporating immune supporting herbs, that's going to help our immune systems every day, especially in the fall, when it's a great time to be making more broths and soups and all this. we can just really easily incorporate that. Another thing to consider, and we're going to wrap up in just a few minutes and there'll be time for questions, is just culinary herbs. So I grabbed this. This is a whole coriander. So this is, if you didn't know, the seed of cilantro. And it's something that a lot of people will have either in their spice cabinet like this, or sometimes it's powdered. And the biggest difference with that is just that powdered herbs are going to not hold their medicinal quality or even their flavor for as long. And so almost all the herbs that we cook with, this is a big generalization, but it's for the most part true. Almost all the herbs we cook with have immune supportive qualities to them. Not in the same way that the astragalus does, or the reishi, or the elderberry, but so many of the herbs, because they are flavorful and they have essential oils, those volatile oils have immune supporting, like antibacterial, antimicrobial effects. And so we can also think about our food as medicine in this way of supporting the immune system, less on a long term, but more on like the short term of bringing that food into our body is going to also help cooking it with our broth and help with the immune system. So you can add any other herbs that you like from your spice cabinet, and I would really encourage you to just play along. As you can see, I really don't have a lot of like hard and fast rules around broth. I think it's a place to be really playful in the kitchen, and I would encourage you to just feel it out for yourself. I'm sure if you make broth, then you will find your own rhythms. Some people might throw their immune supporting herbs like into the bag in the freezer, and that way they will allow you don't have to think about it. Like you can just prepare that bag and then fill it up over time, and then it'll just all get tossed into the pot when it's ready. If you are making it on the stove, I would recommend bringing it to a boil and like letting it simmer. The hard part about the stove is, it's a little bit safer to leave the house if you are doing the bone broth. Some people cook it up to 72 hours, so 3 days. It's hard to keep track of it and if you're sleeping and everything. So I definitely encourage people, if they're going to cook it for longer than they're able to be near it, to use the crock pot. And a couple other things I want to mention is how to use the broth. So in the handout, but I also shared it in the chat earlier, is one really fun way to use it is there is like a hot chocolate that people make out of it. And so it's really just like broth, and you can add some nut milk if you want, or whatever kind of milk. And then the hot chocolate and a little sweetener if you'd like. And so, or sorry, the cocoa powder. So there is a link here. I'll share it again in the chat, and it's also in the handout. The most common way that I use it are 2 ways. So the first is using it in any soup that that I'm cooking. So it could be like a chicken noodle soup to esque, right? Like whether or not it has chickens or noodles, but is varies. But some sort of like brothy soup, like Tom Kha, I would use it. That's like coconut based as well. But any soup, as well as like any puree, any recipe that calls for broth, right? It's so great to have this on hand. And then you can you can reduce waste by buying the boxes, which are, usually indestructible. And you can just buy your own jars or collect your jars and then reuse those. I love bringing broth to friends who are sick or just had a kid or just needing extra support. Like you can keep it in your freezer and just have it ready to go when you need it. It does last because there is a certain amount of like fat in the broth with the bone broth. It will create a layer of fat at the top, and that acts as a seal for any bacteria. And so it will last in the fridge for several weeks, much longer than just like water. And yeah, it's great to just use in also rice. When I'm making my grains, if I'm making rice or whatever grain, quinoa, I'll just use it instead of water in like equal amounts. And so that way, I'm also getting that medicinal and nutritional benefit from the broth when, again, I'm eating rice. So those are the three ways that I really encourage folks to use it in just your everyday. And I'm sure there's many, many more ways to use it. I'm never like at a loss of what to do with my broth. I'm usually wishing that I had more. Um, and then the last thing I want to mention as well, in the handout, there's a list of vegetables. And so when you're preparing your veggie scrap bag, keep in mind that some vegetables are going to be better for broth. Mostly the members of the brassica family are what you want to avoid. And there's quite a few members of the brassica family. So that means broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, bok choy, collard greens, and kohlrabi are all no-nos for your broth bag of scraps. And pretty much everything else is okay. I'd say top few ones to keep in mind: carrots, celery, onions, classic broth recipes, anything in the onion allium family, garlic, leeks, scallions, anything like that. Your mushroom stems when you're preparing your mushrooms, and the scraps from your squash, your potatoes, beets, whatever. If you're like peeling vegetables, they say that the most nutrients are in the skin of vegetables. A lot of times we don't eat them because we want it to have a certain flavor or texture, but you can actually just bring those nutrients back into your food by putting them into your broth and then incorporating the broth into your foods. There's some maybe herbs and plants on the list as well. Again, you just don't want it to be like the majority of your broth, but adding those can work. The issue with the brassica families is that they cause like gas, and it's gonna smell bad. The broth will smell bad, your farts are gonna smell bad, and I would just avoid it. So it's not like poisonous, it's just not fun. The last thing I'll say is I think making broth is just a really traditional way to use what we have and to not waste things. It can be like almost like a traditional remedy, as well as like a money saving trick. So it's just useful in so many ways, as well as like helpful and healing. So that's why I love medicinal broth so much. So I was wondering if people want to take a little break or just jump into questions. Oh, great question, Danielle. So Danielle asks, do you ever roast the bones first? Do you have an opinion about using organic versus non-organic bones? Great question. So I don't roast the bones. I have heard of that. I'm curious, Danielle, if you know why people do that. Because I can imagine, but I'm not sure. I don't. I usually just, like I said, collect them when I'm like eating meat. Sometimes I do go to the grocery store or the like meat store, and like we'll buy just like beef bones by the pound to make broth, or like sometimes you can also get like chicken backs. So you can use any meat, any bone, especially after the, classic genocidal holiday, Thanksgiving. That's a really great time to like ask people for bones. Like if you go to a dinner or you host one or you have friends that are going to one, you can just say like, hey, will you save your bones for me? Because you can get really good bones. And I absolutely encourage people to use organic bones just because when you think about like all of the toxins of like that a being is exposed to, right? Like we don't really have a choice anymore to be exposed to toxins because of the world that we live in. But a lot of times these vital organs like liver, bones, that's where like if an animal is exposed to toxins, it's going to kind of like store them or deposit them, right? Like we're breaking down the bones, we're getting the marrow, like every single part of this like being is being like just fully reincarnated in like the physical sense of just like sign like chemical changes of breaking down um you know these tissues. And so of course if it's non-organic, then you're getting that into your broth. So, um, at the same time, I wouldn't say like, oh, if you don't have organic bones, like it's not worth making it. I think we live in such a complicated world that, you can only do the best you can with the resources that you have access to. But I generally recommend that my clients, and the people that I'm working with encourage, eat as much organic food as possible. And I think meat is, if you're going to make a decision about what to buy organic, thinking about foods that absorb it. So like meat, fats, and then looking, if you're not familiar with like the environmental working group, like clean 15. So like certain vegetables, like especially if they have a peel, something that can be taken off, those are going to be generally safer to eat that are non-organic versus like a strawberry that you can't take like anything off of it, right? It's just exposed to the pesticides or however it's being grown. So, yeah, I think buying, I know it's expensive and this is a great way, because food's so expensive and meat in particular, by making broth, you really get to like extend the life of the purchase and you get to just keep utilizing. Like I bought a couple, I think it was like one duck many years ago, but one time I kept track of how many meals I was able to like eat this duck for. And once it came time to turn it into broth, it was like a couple weeks after I had purchased the duck. And ducks aren't even that big, but really just utilizing what we have in like a resourceful way and like using it all to the best extent is really great. Are there any other questions? I'm happy to answer questions in the chat, or you can unmute or however you like. Thank you all for coming. I will share the slide deck in the chat, and like I said, it'll be in the email as well for folks who are joining afterwards. And I wanted to let you all know that we have the next Think Like an Herbalist is coming up in November on the 10th. It's all about oils, making medicinal oils, and we'll talk about the different types of medicinal oils, how to make them at home. So there's the slide deck. I see, Danielle, you have another question. Do you use the same bones more than once? I generally don't. For the reason that kind of like making a tea, when the bones are done, and I wish I had this example for you because it would be really illustrative. When you've cooked the bones, I guess this is good to say. When you've cooked the bones, they will just be like breaking apart. They are just fully mush, completely disintegrating. Like a chicken bone, you just touch it and it turns into like a pile of sand. Like it's just fully cooked. And so the idea of reusing it, I think is a resourceful one. Um, However, when you're done, you should mostly have used it all fully, like fully extracted all the trace minerals, nutrients, amino acids, right? And so it's kind of like when you re-steep a tea bag, the second steep is never as strong because there's less to extract from the leaves. And so I have seen, not with bone broth, but I have seen people reuse like tea product. Like I have a friend who makes like a big batch of tea um that they drink every morning, and it's like all these herbs, mixed in their crock pot. And then they do that a couple times. They freeze the material in between. And then the second round, they put all of the herbs together back into the crock pot, but they're using like two batches. So the first batch, maybe they use like, a cup of herbs or 2 cups of herbs, let's say 2 cups of herbs for the first batch. The second batch has 4 cups of herbs, but they've already been used. So the idea being that if you are going to reuse them, make sure that you are increasing the volume. Otherwise, you're just going to get kind of like diminishing returns. And I think it depends on like your space, how much time you want to devote to like keeping the material and like straining it. I usually feel like once I've cooked it for like, I'll cook it between 24 and 72 hours. Again, like not a clear recipe, like just like whatever I feel like, however much time I have. Like it really just, it is what it varies. However I want to make it. So, um, the idea is just that, I'm making it with what I have, and then whenever I feel like it is done, I strain it. And when I strain it out, I'll use like a sieve and a canning funnel, and I put those two together. I'm happy to show you that. I feel like I could show you a little bit more about kind of how I finish it. Um, so here I have my half, what is that? Of a quart jar, so quarter of a gallon. Um, so here's my quart jar. And then I will usually, these are an indispensable tool for the kitchen. This is called a canning funnel. And they're a little bit pricey, like they're probably like $8 to $10, but worth every penny in my opinion. So I usually put that in there, and then I put this little sieve up top. Sometimes I do use, if for some reason I can't find this, I'll put my like tea strainer in and it fits right in there like that. But I like to kind of keep my tea strainer like just for tea because, I'm an herbalist. But yeah, so I usually do that. And then I'll take my ladle and I just scoop it into the, when it's done, I take a scoop. And then if there's any like, leaves and stuff, because I've added my vegetables are going in there at some point, then I just strain it in there. And then whatever it was in my ladle that I don't want in my broth, I can take it out. Sometimes I'm like squishing this down like this to really like kind of get it all out, right? I don't want to lose, I want to take all the liquid because that's the good stuff. And then if this gets full, I'll dump it into the compost, and then I'll come back and I'll keep straining. And then I put the lid on my jar. And then I usually label it because it's important to label all of your medicinal creations. Because you think, oh, I might not remember what that is. But you don't, I promise you. I have way too many jars in my life. And if you start thinking like an herbalist, you might go down the same path as me. And so I'll just put my little label on there and have a date, and then I'll put that in the fridge. So if you haven't joined my newsletter, I would love for anybody who's interested to join Whale Mail, which is my newsletter that comes out every Wednesday. And I will put that link in the chat as well in just a moment. And yeah, if there's any other questions, let me know. Again, thanks for coming. And I'm going to grab that link in just a moment. I think computer is being a little slow. The quickest way probably for me to share that with you is just if you head over to my website here, it'll pop up in just like 3 to 5 seconds after. So I'll just share that. My link to the website, and then the pop-up will show up after, I don't know, 5 to 10 seconds, I guess. And then you can join the Whale Mail. Just to stay updated, I do lots of free events in San Francisco, free and low cost, and also other events, and I work with clients. So if you're interested, definitely stay in touch. And that, I think, is all we have for tonight. Thanks so much. Have a good night.